and welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. I'm Kim Menninger, and I am so grateful that you are here. It's now been more than a year since I started this podcast, and I can't tell you how much I've learned and grown from the conversations that we've had here. As you may have heard me share, I have struggled with imposter syndrome and anxiety for much of my life, so this is a very personal journey for me. I do this podcast because I want us to share our stories with each other and to stop suffering in silence. Imposter syndrome is a pretty universal human experience and nothing we should be ashamed of. By listening to or supporting this podcast, you're helping me to advance my mission of destigmatizing this conversation and making it safe for everyone to be vulnerable and get the support they need. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support this mission even further, please consider subscribing. And if you feel inclined to leave a 5-star review, this really does help raise the visibility of the podcast so that others can find us. And please consider sharing with your friends. Lastly, if you have a story you'd like to share, connect with me anytime. I would be happy to interview you. Thanks again for being here. Welcome, Linda. I am really excited to talk to you today, and I'd love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
I am Linda Ugelow. I live in Massachusetts, and I am very passionate about helping people get to the other side of being comfortable or going from being afraid to put themselves out there, whether it's speaking or sending emails or any way that you find in your work that you need to be more visible and put your ideas in front of other people that may be uncomfortable, and helping people to get to the other side. So I am a speaking confidence coach in the specific and the author of this book, In The Limelight, helping people overcome their fear of being seen so they can realize their dreams.
Wonderful. And I can't wait to dive into more of the themes around that. I want to start by asking you just a couple of questions that I generally ask, which are, number one, what does imposter syndrome mean to you? And number two, how, if at all, has it shown up in your life or in your work?
Sure. Imposter syndrome to me, I mean, I can go, anyone can Google what the origins, I'm sure you've covered that in all of your in past podcasts. What it means to me is feeling like I'm not good enough. That somehow if people knew that who I really was, they would have a different image of me. So it's like that feeling of being an imposter, feeling like a fraud. And in terms of where it's shown up in my life, it's interesting because I don't know, I didn't hear the word imposter syndrome until, in the last 5 years. So in the past, I wouldn't have named it that. But I remember times when I was a dance teacher and I was using this therapeutic process for people to get comfortable actually being seen, not heard, but seen. It was called authentic movement. And I remember going into a bathroom, a public bathroom in Cambridge, and when I closed the stall, there was this beautiful flyer. These were the days of flyers, putting up flyers, of someone I knew who was offering an authentic movement class like I do. And it was so beautifully written. And I burst into tears. I mean, this, kind of overlaps with comparisonitis, but I was just thinking, I'm not good enough, and I don't know whatever I could do to feel like I was good enough as a teacher and in my work. And more recently, I actually had a very deep imposter syndrome come up as a performer, because I've been a performer for 40 years with a women's world music group called Labana. And people would assume that I'm comfortable singing. And I went through this period in the middle of that career and that I feel like I'm still coming out of, where I felt like I was afraid to sing. I was afraid to sing in front of people. And certain situations were okay, but when people would say, oh, of course you're a great singer, and I'm thinking, no, I'm really not. Or of course you're comfortable. You'll come and, sing, help me lead this or do that. And I was thinking, no, don't ask me. It was like I was petrified that people would, well, I don't know if it was, I was petrified of having to actually sing in front of like intimate groups. But I felt extremely uncomfortable with the idea that people had a particular image of me, which I felt was not true.
Do you see parallels between what you're describing as your experience and what people come to you for?
Absolutely. And this was actually a surprise, to tell you the truth, because when I first started to help people overcome their fear of being seen and heard, and the way I do this, I'll just describe, is it's not about like pushing it away or finding management techniques, although those things are perfectly good and they're wonderful, but they're not long lasting. I'm particularly interested in helping people to find the root causes, the experiences they had, the messages that they received that led them to believe it wasn't safe. And then we work to resolve those things and heal them so that they're no longer being triggered whenever people are wanting to stand up and speak or to share at a meeting or to get on video as an entrepreneur and get in front of their audience, any of those things. So what surprised me was, I think it happened 2 years ago, someone came to me and she said, I feel like a complete imposter. I have imposter syndrome. And it was the first time that someone had actually used those words when they came to me. And I said, well, let's investigate, because that's what we always do, is we investigate. And what came out from her experience, which really kind of like was a light bulb moment for me, was that she had two parents actually, but subsequently I've seen this happen with even just one parent, where she felt that nothing she did would ever be enough. Nothing she did would ever please them, that she was constantly trying to win their positive regard, win their love. And the way that she received it was whenever she got that A+, whenever she got that, first place, she had to be exceptional in order to get any kind of feeling of, okay, my parents love me, I belong. And unfortunately, even though she would get it in those moments, in between, she got a very different thing where they would put her down. They would say, why did God punish us with you? Why can't you be like this? Why can't you be like that? You are so, it was constant, like, cutting away at her sense of self and her, of being like she was okay. And I just have to say that she is a beautiful woman, classically beautiful. So it's kind of like, wow, I can't believe that someone would be so mean and injurious to her. But, it's not about blaming, because as she and I came to understand, and which I believe very deeply, is that people who are injured often pass that on because they don't have the self-awareness. They didn't have the resources to have that self-awareness in order to do it differently. So she recognized that her parents also got this from their parents. And unfortunately, and it was cultural as well. But I have since come to see that everyone who has that sense, that comes to me with this idea of, I feel like a fraud, I feel like an imposter, if I ask them, was there someone that you tried to please that you couldn't? They all said, yes. And so I'm really curious, Kim, does this match up for what you've heard, what you've experienced?
Yes. Absolutely. You're hitting on one of the most powerful triggers or underlying influences of imposter syndrome. And it's that early childhood relationship with the primary caregiver. It could be, like you said, one parent, both parents. And usually it's interesting. It could be one of two key scenarios. Number one is the parent that's overly effusive in their praise. So the parent who says, "You're a genius, you can do no wrong." They basically overinflate the child's ego, for lack of a better term. And then the child goes out into the world and starts to get more nuanced feedback from other people that are influencers, like coaches or teachers. And they don't know how to reconcile that because they trust their parents, they don't know who to trust, and it becomes this seed of self-doubt. And they might find that they're so eager to please their parents who have told them, "You're so smart and so wonderful," that they don't want to put themselves into positions where they're not going to be able to achieve that outcome because they're afraid they're going to disappoint the parent. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum is what you're describing, which is that critical parent. And maybe it's a parent who actively criticizes or has really high expectations of their child, or it's somebody who doesn't give enough feedback and the child just always feels like nothing I do is good enough, and they're constantly trying to please a parent, and that creates that sense of self-doubt.
Yeah. That's so interesting that what you said about the overinflation piece. I'm going to ponder on that one, because I have seen that, but it's not come to me. I've seen that in other people, and but it's not been in people who have come to me for work. So I'm going to have to investigate that. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm thrilled by that, actually, because I'm always looking to see how I can deepen my understanding so I can help people better in what they're struggling with.
Yeah, frankly, that's my story. So I didn't grow up with critical parents. I grew up with a mom who was overly, just everything I did was perfect. And it was such high pressure, and it gave me the impression that anytime I tried something new or did something new, that I should be perfect. And when I wasn't, then I never felt good enough. And, so I'd quit early. I would take a new class, and it didn't come naturally to me, obviously, because I was there for the first time. And then I would say, well, obviously I just can't do this. And I would, as opposed to recognizing there's a lot of effort involved, a lot of practice involved in mastering something new.
Yes. In fact, I think there was an article some years ago about this situation where kids who were told that they, were fantastic, got the impression that it should come easy.
Yeah.
And that whenever things seemed difficult, that they didn't have the stamina for enduring being a beginner and going through all the things that you have to do as a beginner, which is that you suck,
Yeah. My husband has helped me with that, because he is, he'll say this in a loving way, but he'll say, how, essentially, this is my interpretation, like, how narcissistic of you to assume that you would be perfect at something that you've never done before, right?
Yeah.
I started taking piano lessons when I was pregnant with my older son, and I thought, well, I can type, so obviously I'll be really good at playing the piano. And it was so hard. And he's like, why would you think that would come easily to you? There are people who spend their whole lives mastering this. And it made me realize, like, you know what? You're right. It isn't a realistic expectation. And it doesn't mean that I'm not capable of it. I just have to reset expectations around what's realistic.
Yeah. I see a similar kind of thing with education. So a lot of people who have gotten, really good grades in school, then they'll think that because in school, you can figure out what the teacher wants. And you do what you do in order to, it's kind of like this strategy game that you go through, that you give the teacher what they want and you get the grade. But in real life, there are too many people to please. And so a lot of people will, just as you describe, will not put themselves into positions where they feel they can't control that they will be at the top or they'll be perfect because they've come to identify themselves as, I'm a great student, I'm always at the top, and if I can't be at the top, I don't want to be there at all.
Yes. Yes. And that's reminding me of, I've heard you say this before, which I've so appreciated and have taken with me, is this idea of school really valuing perfection, because you're graded based on your performance against a scale that goes up to, let's say, 100, right? And you get the best scores, the more perfect you are. And so I hadn't thought about it that way before, but that conditioning, right? That we spend so much of our lives in school trying to be perfect according to the standards of the system.
That's right. And not making mistakes. We get graded on making the fewest mistakes, which, you kind of buy into as, well, that's a good thing. But is it really a good thing? Because like in business, let's say in research and what is it, R&R? What does that stand for?
Oh, R&D, research and development?
Yeah, research and development. They actually build in time for making mistakes. You can't know what you want until you also see what doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So there is a very different mindset around like experimentation. You have to try things out and see how they go. And that there are no real mistakes. It's only data. It's like, I'm going to try this and let's see what happens. I'm going to try that and let's see what happens. But if you're feeling like it's not okay, if it doesn't work out, then we're suffering so needlessly, because really life is so much about experimentation. And that's not what they're teaching in school. What they're teaching in school is, they give lip service, I believe, but you're always after the right answer.
That's right. Yes, you're exactly right. And I think I love the idea of treating everything as a science experiment or an experiment of some sort, right? You're collecting data, but we get so emotionally attached to the outcome, and it becomes so intertwined with our identities that it feels too unsafe to take risks.
Right. And unfortunately, then we feel like so much of life is not safe.
That's right. Yeah.
And so we carry around this anxiety with us, and people go into their workplaces with so much anxiety, worried about all these things, as opposed to, here I am, tell me how I can help.
Mm-hmm.
How to be helpful, but being comfortable with the idea of, I'm here to serve, I'm here to help out, I'm part of the team, as opposed to, am I good enough? What do people think of me? The whole, amygdala fear center being activated and on alert all the time. I think that we get that from school. Kids are stressed out all the time. And I think people in their work lives get stressed out for the same reasons.
Yes.
And yeah.
You said comparisonitis, which I love. Do you have thoughts on what we do about that? Because it is so deeply ingrained in us or conditioned within us throughout.
I'm so glad you asked that, because yes, I do. I struggled with this so deeply. In fact, I felt that it was one of the major reasons why I quit teaching dance, because I could not tolerate feeling so badly about people who are my colleagues. I couldn't stand this feeling of feeling so negatively. And I thought, I don't want to bring that negativity into the work that I do. And then when I became an online coach, I started to feel it come up again, even though it was like 20 years later. And I did a lot of research on it, and I found a personal way of dealing with it. And this is what it is. When I look at somebody who I start to feel like a little jealousy of, I'll stop. And I think one of your other guests said this. They love the word curious. I do too. I let myself be curious. Okay, what is it about what they have or what they're doing that I desire? And then I will list those things. And I'll say either, I'll make sure as I go down the list, is this something I really want for myself? And if it is, let me celebrate that desire. Because we're taught, I also think that we're taught that desire is somehow bad, that we shouldn't have desire. But desire actually is this deep longing and motivation that we have to create. And I think that we need to honor it and celebrate it. And it's very tied in with this comparisonitis. I think that other people, when we see other people doing things that we also want, it triggers that desire. And what we need to do is separate out the pieces that we don't want and recognize the pieces that we do want, and also say, this is what I'm going to go after. Because it's one thing to just like, oh my God, I don't know what to do about this. I'm just going to like wallow in my bad feelings, as opposed to, this is something I really want. And if that's something I really want, I'm going to keep that front of mind and I'm going to go after that. I may not know what the next step is, but I'm going to head in that direction. And as we're active, I feel like we feel like we can honor where we are on our personal journey. We stay in our lane and we allow other people to be in theirs.
I really like that for so many reasons. I think that it is so not toxic, maybe too strong a word, but there's so much negative energy that comes with comparing ourselves to other people and feeling like we don't measure up. And then there's all kinds of bitterness or jealousy or whatever, like you were describing. But I also love this idea of when that comes up, using it as a moment to really reflect and ask yourself, what does this say about what I want? And with more consciousness from that, well, what does that need to look like then, right? Like what can I be doing differently or more of, et cetera, to put myself on that path?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. So I do think it's an opportunity, and unfortunately, when we get into that feeling, it kind of takes us over, whereas we could use that feeling as a signal. Oh, here's my opportunity to understand more of what I want. Mm. And actually, to tell you the truth, that happened I'm so glad you're saying this, because I don't even remember who it was, but in the last few days, this happened to me where I had a trigger of jealousy. I don't even know the person, but there was something about it that triggered in me. And because of my life circumstances, I did gloss over it. But now I'm going to go back and I'm going to do what I just said to do. Because I know that I'll benefit from that.
That's great. Yeah. I think one of the things I've been trying to do or to at least give as a message to my children, as opposed to, the you're wonderful or you're perfect kind of messaging that didn't work for me, is to say to them, you don't have to be the best, but I want you to do your best. And so I always tell them, there will always be people who are better at something, and you're always going to be better than some people. But what I want you to feel at the end of anything that you do is like you gave it your best, right? And so sometimes if I feel like they've slacked off or didn't do it as well as they could have, I'll say, does that feel like your best, right? And so one of the things that I'm realizing as you and I are talking is that I could probably do that with myself a little better.
I know. And the other thing, Kim, is, do we always have to do our best? That's the other question.
That's That's true too. And what does your best mean in any given situation, right? Because I think sometimes when those perfectionistic tendencies come out, we need to recognize, good enough is good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that we're not going to be at our best at everything. We do need to prioritize because we have the capacity that we have at different times in our life. Sometimes we have greater capacity and sometimes we have less.
That's right. Yeah. I think it does all boil down to this idea of not beating ourselves up over everything that we feel we don't do well enough, or constantly comparing ourselves to other people. There's just so many messages that we've internalized that are not productive or helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of something that I love to do at night, which is I love to state 5 things to myself that I'm proud of from the day. So these could be big things or little things. It could even be like I made a good meal for myself, or I sent out that email, or I reached out to this person. And then the same thing with what I forgive myself for. Forgiving myself for things that I didn't get to, things that I didn't do as well as I had hoped to. And in this way, kind of honoring where I am, the things that I want to elevate and savor, as well as the things that I want to release and let go of.
That is so powerful. I love that. And I love that too, because I'm always encouraging women in particular to spend more time actively reflecting on what has gone well, because I think so often we're either tuning into the negative or we're breezing past the positive. And so by the time we get to, the next stop, whatever that is, it feels almost like a fluke, right? It feels like, how did I get here? Because I haven't stopped and appreciated all of those moments along the way that have led me here, all of the choices that I made, or the risks that I took, or the ways in which I've used my strengths. And so that kind of a system that you're describing is so powerful, because it balances out what did I do well, and not, what didn't go well, but what do I forgive myself for, which is a really great way of framing that.
Yeah, I always am looking for ways to feel better. So I always think, if I have a choice of feeling bad about something or feeling okay about something, which would I choose? So yes, that's
a great habit to get into. Is there anything else that you think has come up in the conversations that you have with the people that come to you, or anything else that feels important to you in this conversation that we didn't get to yet?
I would say I would encourage people to look at, we got into this a little bit at the beginning, to look at what are the messages that you received, what are the experiences that you had earlier on that may have led you to believe that it wasn't okay for you to be as you are, that either pressured you to perform before you felt ready, or that diminished or ridiculed or shamed or hurt you in some way. And honor those for needing still some healing or resolution, so that you can feel like you're not carrying them on in perpetuity, but you are allowing those parts of yourself to get some attention so that you can kind of put them away. And of course, they're still part of your story, but they're no longer dictating or driving your choices because of how things were. That doesn't mean that's how you need to be going forward. But you won't be able to really feel free moving forward without addressing those things in the past, in my opinion.
I agree with you completely. I think that's such a great recommendation to everybody. And I'm assuming, although you can correct me if I'm wrong, that you go into some of this in your book. Can you remind us what the name of the book is?
Yes, the book is Delight in the Limelight. Overcome your fear of being seen and realize your dreams. And I do go over all of these things, how to discover what those experiences and messages were. and how to resolve them and clear them away. I also spent 3 chapters on transforming your inner critic and healing your self-image, because that's something that we all have been injured by in our society, I believe, as well as kind of repatterning the habits that we have, because we become who we are because of the experiences we've had. And so how do we then, once we clear the past, how do we move forward and create the kind of habits of confidence and ease and relaxation and dynamics? What is the dynamism? Is that a word?
Yeah, it sounds funny, but I think it is.
Yeah, dynamism. Just how to free our self-expression, as well as how to prepare, whether you're speaking spontaneously or you are memorizing for one of the places where you are wanting to speak up.
Oh, I think that sounds like an amazing resource, Linda. And I'm going to put the link in the chat, more information about you too, so anybody who's interested can follow up. And thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I feel like I can talk to you all day. I know you and I have had these kinds of conversations in the past, and I always learn from you. You're very inspiring, and I'm just grateful that you're here.
Well, I feel likewise about you, Kim. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening. If you'd like to stay connected, please join the Leading Women discussion group, which meets every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. This is a place where women come together to discuss questions or challenges related to leadership development and career management. It's a great place to learn from, support, and connect with other women on similar journeys. In addition to the weekly calls, we also have a Facebook group and a Slack channel where we stay connected and support each other. Please join us there too. You can check out the show notes for the links. Before we wrap up, if you like this podcast, I would love to share another podcast with you that I know you will enjoy. Do you ever find yourself playing small? Do you want to take risks, but in the end, you end up taking the safe route? Does your inner critic keep you from reaching your full potential? As counterintuitive as it often feels, we don't become confident first and then take action. It's through our actions that we build our confidence. That's why one of the greatest ways to manage imposter syndrome is by taking brave and bold action. If you want inspiration and insights to help you to take action and to be brave at work, then my friend and colleague Jen Pastikas's Brave Women at Work podcast is for you. Jen and I met when we interviewed each other for our podcasts, and I knew instantly that Jen and I shared a similar worldview and a commitment to empowering women to be our best selves. On her podcast, Jen digs into common challenges such as perfectionism, boundary setting, and burnout, all to empower us to shift our mindsets and play bigger in the workplace. You can find the Brave Women at Work podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Visit the show notes for the relevant links. Thanks again, and please stay in touch.